Growing up, my house never really felt like a home. It felt more like a stage where one star always shined, and the rest of us were just shadows in the background. That star was my sister. From the day she was born, my parents seemed to decide she was the child worth investing in, while I was just there. It started with little things that children aren't supposed to notice but always do. At birthdays, her gifts were thoughtful, expensive, and wrapped in ribbons. Mine? Half-hearted, sometimes forgotten or handed over with a distracted smile. When she brought home a good grade, the whole house turned into a celebration. Cake, photos, proud phone calls to relatives. When I did the same, it was brushed off with a simple, "Good. That's what you're supposed to do." She was the golden child, smart, pretty, charismatic, the one who could do no wrong. And my parents never let me forget it. I still remember one evening when I was about 10. My sister had just performed at her school's talent show. She sang a little off-key, but to my parents it was like the heavens themselves opened. They showered her with hugs, bought her flowers, and told her she was destined for greatness. A week later, I came home clutching a drawing I had worked on for days. I placed it on the kitchen table, waiting for their reaction. My mom barely glanced up from her phone. My dad muttered, "That's nice." Then they went back to talking about my sister's big future. That moment carved itself into me like a scar. As we grew older, the favoritism didn't fade. It multiplied. My parents invested in the best schools for her, paid for private tutors, even funded her dream of studying abroad. Meanwhile, I was left to scrape my way through public schools, taking part-time jobs as a teenager just to afford things she got without asking. But the cruelest part wasn't just the money. It was the love. She had their full attention, their affection, their pride. I had silence, disappointment, or indifference. At family dinners, conversations revolved around her achievements, her future, her happiness. I could sit there the whole evening and not a single person would ask about my day. It felt like I was invisible in my own family, and she knew it too. My sister wasn't oblivious. She basked in it. Sometimes she'd give me a smug smile when my parents bragged about her in front of me. Other times, she'd make cutting remarks, like, "Well, not everyone can be special." It was as if she relished being the chosen one while I was the spare. You'd think that over time I'd get used to it, that I'd numb myself. But every small moment of being overlooked built up into a mountain of hurt. I wasn't jealous of her. I was starving for even a fraction of the love and validation she received without effort. Looking back now, I realize my parents raised two very different children under the same roof. One showered in sunlight, the other left to grow in the shadows. And the saddest part? For years I convinced myself that maybe they were right. Maybe I really wasn't worth loving, but they were wrong. And one day they were going to find out just how wrong. As I got older, the divide between us wasn't just emotional, it became financial, tangible, impossible to ignore. The little signs of favoritism I had endured as a child hardened into life-changing decisions. My parents weren't just giving my sister attention anymore. They were giving her everything. It started when they bought her a car the moment she turned 18. Not just any car, a brand new luxury one. They handed her the keys with tears of pride in their eyes, saying she deserved the best. When my 18th birthday came around, I didn't get keys. I didn't even get a cake. My father handed me $50 and said, almost dismissively, "Put this toward whatever you need." At first, I tried to shrug it off. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe things would balance out eventually. But the imbalance only grew heavier. When it came time for college, my sister's tuition was fully paid. She was sent off with luggage, spending money, and promises of support no matter what. I, on the other hand, had to take out student loans, work late nights, and fight for scholarships just to afford a fraction of the same opportunity. My mother once told me, "You're more independent. You'll figure it out." As if being forced to struggle was somehow a compliment. But the final betrayal came years later, when the truth hit me like a storm I never saw coming. My parents called a family meeting one of the rare times they actually included me. I sat at the dining table, heart thudding, hoping, maybe foolishly, that they were finally going to recognize me, maybe even thank me for how hard I'd worked to make something of myself without their help. Instead, they dropped a bomb. They announced that they were officially transferring the family home, along with my father's small business, into my sister's name. "It only makes sense," my dad explained casually, as if this was the most natural decision in the world. "She's the one who will carry the family legacy forward. You've always been independent. In that moment, I wasn't just invisible, I was erased. My entire existence in their lives reduced to a footnote. The home I grew up in, the walls that held my childhood memories, suddenly belonged to her. The business that could have been shared, something that tied us all together, was handed over without hesitation." I sat there, numb, as my sister smirked across the table. She didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. She leaned back in her chair, twirling her hair, and said, "It's only fair. I mean, I've always been the responsible one." Her words sliced deeper than any knife. That night I lay awake, replaying every moment of my life. Every ignored achievement, every forgotten birthday, every time they had chosen her over me. I had told myself I was strong enough to handle being overlooked, but this was different. This was betrayal in its purest form. They hadn't just favored her, they had abandoned me. Sadness weighed heavy on me, but underneath it, something else began to stir. Resentment, anger, a slow-burning fire I had never allowed myself to feel fully before. They thought I was too quiet, too obedient, too invisible to fight back. But they were wrong. If the family meeting was a betrayal, what came next was the knife twisted deeper. A few weeks later, my parents invited extended relatives over for dinner. The house was buzzing with chatter, laughter, and the smell of food cooking in the kitchen. For once, I thought maybe we could just have a normal evening, but I should have known better. After dinner, when everyone had gathered in the living room, my father stood up with a glass in his hand. He cleared his throat, smiling proudly at my sister, who sat beaming like a queen on her throne. "We have an announcement," he said, his voice loud enough for every relative to hear. I felt my stomach tighten. "As you all know," he continued, "we've made arrangements for the future of our family. The house, the business, everything we've built. It will all belong to our beloved daughter." He placed a hand on my sister's shoulder. "She's proven herself worthy, and we couldn't be prouder. She'll carry the family name forward." There it was, the words I had dreaded but never thought I'd hear so bluntly. "Everything belongs to your sister. You get nothing." The room erupted in applause. Relatives congratulated her, some even wiping away tears of joy. My mother hugged her, whispering words of pride, while my father poured champagne. My sister looked around the room with a smug smile, her eyes landing on me for just a second. That look, triumphant, mocking, pitying, was the final straw. I sat frozen, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. In front of an entire audience, my parents had declared to the world that I was irrelevant, unnecessary, disposable. The home where I grew up, the business my father had once promised me a role in, the future I thought might still hold some place for me, all of it handed to her like a crown. As the celebration carried on, I slipped outside. The night air was cool, but I was burning inside. Tears stung my eyes, but anger quickly overpowered them. I replayed every moment of being ignored, every sacrifice I'd made alone, every ounce of love I had begged for and never received. And now, to top it all, they had humiliated me publicly, stripping away even the illusion that I mattered. For a long time, I just stood there in the dark, staring at the house. Part of me wanted to scream, to march back in and demand answers, but I knew it wouldn't matter. They had already made their choice. In their eyes, I wasn't a part of the family's future. But as I stood there, something shifted. The sadness hardened into resolve. The helplessness transformed into fuel. They thought this was the end of me, that I would quietly fade into the background while my sister basked in the spotlight. But they were wrong. So very wrong. Because that night, under the cold glow of the porch light, I made a silent promise to myself. They would regret underestimating me. They thought they broke me. They had no idea what was coming. While my parents and sister celebrated her victory, I withdrew into silence. To them, I looked defeated, like the forgotten child who had finally accepted her place. But what they didn't know was that I had been building something quietly, piece by piece, away from their gaze. The truth was, I had never trusted their favoritism. Deep down, I always knew the day would come when they would strip me of everything. So instead of waiting for scraps, I worked in the shadows, creating my own future. While my sister spent her days being pampered and spoiled, I worked late nights. I took odd jobs, saved obsessively, and poured every ounce of myself into building a small business of my own. It wasn't glamorous at first, just long hours, mistakes, and trial by fire. But slowly it grew. Customers became loyal, profits increased, and what started as survival turned into success. Still, I didn't tell anyone. To my parents, I played the role they expected, the quiet, struggling one. I let them believe I was nothing compared to their golden child. Meanwhile, my bank account grew, and so did my connections. But business success wasn't the only card I held. A year before the family meeting, I had stumbled across an old conversation between my late grandfather and a family friend. He hinted that his original will looked very different from what my parents had told us. My curiosity became an obsession. I dug through records, searched dusty archives, and eventually, with the help of a lawyer, I found it. The truth was undeniable. My grandfather had left me half of his estate, land and assets my parents had conveniently forgotten to mention. They had hidden it, buried it, and funneled everything into my sister's name, hoping I'd never discover it. But I had the documents signed and sealed. Proof that I wasn't the invisible child they made me out to be. I was the rightful heir. I remember sitting in my lawyer's office, the papers spread before us. He looked at me with a steady gaze and said, "Legally, they don't have a leg to stand on. When you're ready, this will change everything." I walked out of that office with a folder tucked under my arm, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in my life, I wasn't powerless. Meanwhile, back at home, my parents and sister lived smugly, blissfully unaware of what was brewing. My sister paraded around in her new role, making big plans for her business and bragging to relatives about the wealth she now controlled. My parents glowed with pride, never once suspecting that the ground beneath their empire was already cracking. I stayed quiet, watching, waiting. I let them believe their narrative, that I was small, forgotten, defeated. But inside, I was sharpening the knife of truth, preparing for the moment when I would walk back into their lives and drop the secret that would shatter their world. The day I chose to confront them, I didn't plan a grand speech or dramatic entrance. I simply walked into the house I grew up in, the house they had sworn belonged to my sister, and asked everyone to gather. My parents sat on the couch, curious but unconcerned, while my sister lounged in the armchair like royalty, scrolling through her phone. For a moment, I just stood there holding the folder close to my chest. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out calm, steady. "I have something to show you," I said. My sister smirked without even looking up. "What is it this time?" "Another speech about how unfair life is." I didn't rise to her bait. Instead, I laid the documents on the table and slid them across. "No, this time it's about what's legally mine." Confusion flickered across my father's face as he picked up the papers. My mother leaned in, her brow furrowing. They scanned the first page, then the next, their expressions tightening with every line. My father's hand began to tremble slightly as he flipped through the signatures and seals. "What? What is this?" he asked, his voice suddenly unsteady. I met his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look away. "It's grandfather's will, the one you never told me about. The one that clearly states half of his estate, and the rights to the land your business sits on, belong to me." The room went still. My mother's lips parted in shock. My father's face drained of color. And my sister? She sat bolt upright, snatching the papers from his hands. She read them frantically, her smug confidence unraveling with each word. "This can't be real," she snapped, her voice rising. "It has to be fake." "It's very real," I replied evenly. "Verified by lawyers, filed with the court. I have every right to claim what you've tried to erase from me. Half the estate, half the assets. And the business you've been parading as yours, dear sister, it sits on land that legally belongs to me." Her face twisted in rage. "You can't do this. They gave it to me." I leaned forward, my voice cutting sharp. "They couldn't give away something that was never theirs to give." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause she had ever received. My parents looked shattered, as though the world they had carefully built around their golden child was crumbling brick by brick. My mother whispered, almost to herself, We thought it was best. But the excuses meant nothing. The truth had already detonated. My sister's meltdown was loud, dramatic, tears, accusations, even a slammed fist on the table. But none of it changed the fact that the power had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the one holding the cards, the proof, the undeniable truth. I gathered the papers back into the folder and stood tall. You wanted everything to belong to her, but it doesn't. It never did. And now, everyone will know. Their silence was the sweetest justice I had ever tasted. The confrontation left a silence in my parents' house that no amount of small talk could fill. My sister, once smug and untouchable, avoided my eyes for days afterward. She no longer paraded around calling herself the heir. She no longer looked at me with that mocking smile. Her arrogance had cracked wide open, and all that spilled out was fear and insecurity. My parents, on the other hand, aged years in a matter of hours. I could see the weight of their mistake pressing on them. Every choice, every dismissal, every time they looked past me and poured everything into her. Now, for the first time, they had to face the truth. They had built their entire world on favoritism, and it had collapsed under the weight of their own bias. They tried, awkwardly, to reach out in the weeks that followed. My mother called more often, her voice softer, almost pleading. My father attempted conversations, asking about my business, my plans, things he had ignored for years. But it wasn't the validation I once craved. Somewhere along this journey, I had stopped needing their approval, because the real victory wasn't just proving them wrong, it was realizing I had built a life they couldn't take away from me. The wealth, the business, the inheritance, it mattered, yes. But what mattered more was the strength I had forged from years of being overlooked. I had survived without their support. I had thrived in spite of their favoritism. And now I wasn't just equal to my sister, I was independent of all of them. As for my sister, her meltdown turned into bitterness. She blamed me, of course, said I had ruined everything, that I was jealous and vindictive. But behind her words, I saw the truth. She wasn't angry because I had taken something from her. She was angry because she was finally forced to stand without the safety net my parents had always spread beneath her. For the first time, she would have to earn her place in the world, and that terrified her. Looking back, I realized the greatest tragedy wasn't what they had done to me. It was what they had done to themselves. By choosing one child and discarding the other, my parents destroyed the very bond that makes a family. They taught me resilience, yes, but they also taught me that love should never be conditional, never measured or rationed. And once I understood that, I stopped feeling like the forgotten child. I wasn't forgotten. I was underestimated. And the difference between the two is everything. Today, when I walk into that house, I no longer feel like an outsider. I don't feel the sting of being overlooked, because I know who I am and what I'm worth. Their approval is no longer my currency. My worth was never theirs to define. They thought giving everything to my sister would leave me with nothing. But in reality, it left me with something far greater, freedom, and that more than any inheritance is the sweetest revenge.